Welcome to the Crypto Scholars Podcast, simplifying and exposing the leading technologies of the modern era and the financial markets that surround them. We engage experts from international tycoons to professors to give you a unique edge in the markets of crypto and blockchain and a first principles breakdown of some of the complex ideas. Today, Crypto Scholars are chatting to ANU law professor Scott Chamberlain. Scott lectures on blockchain and legal innovation. He's also in partnership with a multinational crypto conglomerate, Ripple, to help the development of their XRP ledger, and is currently developing a blockchain called Evernode, which runs on top of the XRP ledger. Would you call it a blockchain, Scott, or would you call it a layer 2 solutions?
Yeah, you can call it lots of things. So, a couple of quick clarifications. I'm not a professor, technically a senior lecturer, and my formal title is Entrepreneurial Fellow at the ANU School of Law.
Okay.
And the work that we do with Ripple is we're part of their University Blockchain Research Initiative, which is a global program. Ripple runs funding over 30 universities around the world to do research, and we're the only Australian university as part of that program at the moment. And the research isn't focused on making the XRP ledger better or anything like that. That happens to be where my stuff has landed, but the research is about what I do is pick an area where they say blockchain and smart contracts can make a difference and actually see if that's true, actually try and build a working prototype. And in the course of doing that, you realise all of the both technical and legal problems that arise that mean that whatever you think this technology can do, it either can't do it or it has to do it in a different way.
Okay. Because I remember 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 2018, you may not remember that you gave a talk to our club on the Clockwork Society.
That's it.
And I had a little listen back over that recording, and you spoke a lot about trust, how blockchain solves the problem of having to trust centralized institutions for a lot of what we do. And you made the comment that as lawyers, a lot of our clientele comes from people abusing the fiduciary duty of that trust. So, and you were very, I guess a lot of it was very theoretical, and the Clockwork Society was a utopian society where you didn't have to trust in those institutions. So now, would you say 4 years on, now that you've got into the nitty-gritty aspects of actually solving some of those specific problems, would you change anything that you said or anything like that?
So I think there's a couple of things that I've learned. One is it's not a utopian vision. There's a dystopian version of it as well.
What do you mean by that?
So if you're going to automate legal relationships, you end up with something that's distinctly unhuman, right? So in our daily lives, we don't enforce every contractual breach, right? And in our daily lives, we're not forced to obey every law. If you want to walk across the road when the little man's red and there's no traffic, you can do that. I think you'd find it intolerable to live in a society where every single law you breached is punished every single time. And that's the potential of a clockwork society. And when we spin that up to things like central bank digital currencies, it's really cool to think about that. The wonderful things that you can do if money's programmable. You might be able to do things like if you've got bushfire victims and you really want to get money to them quickly, you could distribute a special type of digital currency that can only be spent by certain people and only be spent within a certain geographic area, so it only benefits the local community, all right? And it can get there very quickly and it can do wonderful things. But, we saw recently PayPal release and then retract changes to its terms and conditions, saying that it was going to fine you $2,500 if you engaged in effectively wrongthink.
Yeah.
that's the dystopian version, right, where you go to pay for something and the system says you've posted too many right-wing tweets.
Yeah.
You've exceeded your carbon footprint. You haven't bought enough carbon offsets to be able to buy petrol for this particular car. And we already see that working in the Chinese society, where they've got social credit scores and they've got incredible control of, incredible surveillance of their population that's tolerated much more than it is so here in the West.
I guess, digital central bank currencies are very topical at the moment, being promoted in Australia. I think they've got, they're aiming to release one by 2023 at the moment. And in the podcast recently, we had, Blockchain Australia, BTC Markets, the big industry crypto groups, all very pro these central bank digital currencies and pro regulation in that aspect. In your dealings with Ripple, because I know that Ripple started off as you have the Ripple software that was generally sold towards banks and increasing their efficiency using the blockchain tech as distinct, which is inherently centralized, as distinct from, say, the original proposal of Bitcoin, which is trying to get rid of those centralized dealings altogether. How do you, does your dealings deal with just the XRP as distinct from the Ripple currency? Is there any crossover?
Well, there's no such thing as Ripple currency, right?
The XRP
There's only
ledger.
So there is there's a public decentralized blockchain called the XRP ledger, of which XRP is the native asset. Ripple is the majority owner of that asset. But anyone can build on the XRP ledger. Anyone can buy, sell, trade, use XRP for whatever XRP might be useful for. In addition, the XRP ledger has the capacity to issue issued currencies, so you can issue effectively IOUs on the XRP ledger, and there's one or two exchanges that use the XRP ledger to issue stable coins, effectively, US dollar denominated stable coins that are redeemable with that exchange. And the XRP ledger was the first ledger to have a decentralized exchange.
So I guess the question is, what are the benefits of the XRP token as opposed to the ETH token, which I guess is one contrasting token? And is there any trade-off with the fact that, as you said, the majority of them are owned by Ripple, which is a centralized body selling technology to traditional banks?
Well, the way the XRP ledger works, ownership of the token doesn't give you any special rights.
Okay.
It's not proof of stake, right? So the way the ecosystem works out now, there's effectively three different types of blockchain. You've got Bitcoin, the original proof of work, no smart contract capacity, so Bitcoin's not programmable. It simply is what it is. You can send one Bitcoin, you can send fractions of Bitcoin from one address to another. And it's incredibly difficult to forge a Bitcoin. So it's a reliable form of money. Then you've got Ethereum, which is now proof of stake, but the main selling point of Ethereum was the programmability, its capacity to have bespoke smart contracts that you can use to do all kinds of programmable stuff with the assets that exist on the Ethereum blockchain. Ripple's in a third space, or the XRP ledger's in a third space entirely because it's based on what's called a UNL, unique node list consensus algorithm. So it's not proof of work, it's not proof of stake. You've got validators that do no more than determine which valid transaction should go ahead of the ledger of any other valid transaction. So the validators are simply agreeing upon the order in which they should organise valid transactions. That means the XRP ledger, it's 3 seconds for each transaction. It's 0.00002 of a cent per transaction. So it's very cheap and it's very fast, but the XRP ledger at the moment doesn't have a smart contract capacity. It's got some features in it that mimic smart contracts. It's got escrows, it's got a DEX, which on Ethereum you would need smart contracts to mimic, but they exist as native functions on the XRP ledger.
Right.
But it doesn't have a generic programmability. You can't do an automated market maker on the XRP ledger yet, but you can on Ethereum and you can't on Bitcoin. So they're almost like three, completely
It's a separate blockchain.
Parts of the triangle.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of the space, right? They just map. It's alien compared to the rest of the blockchain tech, right? Whereas it all comes out of proof of work or proof of stake. It's a unique node list. It's something very different.
Okay. So I guess simplifying that to listeners who may not be have such a technical understanding of the space, it's a separate consensus algorithm to validate these transactions almost. So where in Bitcoin mining, if a bad actor makes a fraudulent transaction, they have their energy and the effort that they exerted into mining that transaction is wasted. They lose that, so there's no incentive to do that. In Ethereum, instead of work, it's staked, and then you lose whatever you've staked. Where is the sacrifice for the Ripple, for the XRP?
There isn't. What you lose as a Ripple validator is you lose trust. So the way the unique node list works is each node has a list, a text file, of all of the other nodes that it chooses to trust. So you trust the nodes you choose to trust, I trust the nodes I choose to trust. And if there's enough overlap between the nodes that everyone trusts, then you get a canonical chain made out of those overlapping unique node lists.
Okay. I think that's really interesting because before talking to you, I was under the impression that Ripple was a software sold to banks, and the XRP had nothing to do with it, and everyone trading XRP was doing it under the guise that it had something to do with the technology that they were selling to banks. But after talking to you, there is actually a inherent benefit of the XRP in Ledger in itself, and I think many people wouldn't be aware of that, and maybe that needs to be promoted.
Yeah. So look, in the politics of the blockchain universe, Ripple is a hated company, and the XRP ledger is a piece of technology about which there's lots of FUD and lots of hate. But whatever the status of that, it's useful, right? So I've used the XRP ledger repeatedly to do international transfers. And it works. There are exchanges in Australia that are liquidity partners for the XRP ledger, and it takes me 3 seconds to transfer assets from exchanges overseas to an exchange here locally, and then it takes another 20 seconds for the money in that account to end up in my bank account.
Okay.
Now that's an unbeatable experience, and I've done it repeatedly. Like it works.
Is that scalable to the levels that we would need for something like Swift or?
Well, none of this tech is scalable to those sorts of
What about in contrast to, say, the leading technologies that aim to solve that problem, or is that not the problem there?
Well, no. So you've got an inherent barrier, right? If you're going to have a blockchain, then you're going to have, or if you're going to have, what you're talking about with the blockchain is a database where the canonical state is maintained across multiple instances or multiple nodes, and the speed of light imposes certain restrictions on the speed with which the nodes in your blockchain can agree that canonical state amongst each other without breaking apart or forking or ceasing to work. So the XRP ledger, it's 3 to 4 seconds, and it's about 1,500 transactions per second that you can include in that list, which is a superior throughput Bitcoin and to Ethereum, but it's not approaching Visa, right? It's the inevitable. It's the slowdown that you have. The benefit of things like these digital assets is when I send you the digital asset, I've actually settled the transaction, right?
Yeah.
When you pay with your credit card, the payment is accepted. Yeah, that happens instantaneously, but in the background, it's several days before the merchant has their money. So there's a gap between payment and settlement. What these blockchain technologies do is the payment and the asset travel together, so it's settled at one and the same time. That's fantastic. There's lots of things you can do if that's your outcome.
I guess that's one of the benefits of the technology that the central bank, the RBA, Blockchain Australia are trying to promote that aspect of the Bitcoin, international transactions, instant settlements. Would you promote, as they go through talks at the moment in trying to develop their own central bank digital currency, would you be an advocate of using XRP as that technology?
No, you wouldn't use XRP as the central bank digital currency.
But the XRP blockchain
the XRP
technology
ledger,
as opposed to the
so that's
Ethereum.
unlikely to be the case too, because the problem with these blockchains is they're all public, and most of the banks would require a degree of privacy. What they'll end up with is some sort of bespoke, to the extent that they actually do it, they'll end up with a bespoke application or a bespoke network where the central bank has full visibility of the network.
Yeah.
The financial institutions have full or limited visibility, and you and I as user of the network can only see our own accounts and can't see anyone else's. It'll be that type of need. You simply won't want a public blockchain where I can see how much currency is in your bank account.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I think that's a big impediment in blockchain consultancy at the moment as well. So not just currencies, but as I take it, big businesses are avoiding blockchain for their ledgers because their competitors can also view their ledgers as well, and they don't want it to be public. But that's another tangent.
Yeah. But there are some use cases where that's a valuable. That's one of the reasons for using a decentralised system is that people can see what you're doing and you can't forge it. That's part of one of the principles. But there are others where I want some privacy. What I've found in my research, and I've made this point to regulators, is all of the useful cases for blockchain technology depend upon the existence of a stable coin or a central bank digital currency. So if I want to use it, we have a project we call Digital Cows, which is being able to tokenise and trade interests in Australian cattle, so that I can buy and sell cattle without actually having to move them. And you can't do that with everyone on the system using their own bank account because the blockchain is completely separate from your existing payment rails. And if I want to connect my blockchain network to the payment rails, I need APIs and I need oracles. Someone has to sit in the middle to connect it, and then someone's got to sign all the agreements with all the banks to do that, which means I've instantly centralised this decentralised system. What I want is I want a digital currency that is an Australian dollar that can be traded on this network in return for tokens that represent interest in cows, and then redeem that with the bank or many banks. I'd prefer a marketplace of banks because I don't want one bank to control it. In Australia, we've had, throughout the world now, we've got increasing the problems of people being unbanked because we've got anti-money laundering and know your customer rules and this risk management approach. Yeah. People are turning up and finding that their bank is simply refusing to bank them for unspecified, no specified reason. They've just decided, right? And the last thing you'd want is a blockchain network where the bank turns around and goes, this is all too risky. I'm withdrawing my stable coin. Yeah. Well, now you're stuffed, right? Now you've got nothing.
So in effect, decentralizing it to the extent that you can with many banks, as opposed to
Yeah,
relying
you want a
on one.
marketplace of
Yeah.
stablecoins, or better still, you want a central bank digital currency where you
Yeah.
can't be unbanked by you. The RBA can't unbank you,
Yeah.
right?
So, with your comments at the start talking about the dystopian possibility of the central bank digital currency and the benefits that you could get using the cows with a project that you have developing, do you see a happy medium where the central bank digital currency created, but the government doesn't have powers to do what you described PayPal doing at the start?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of growing up that needs to happen around our political discourse, right? So we're used to talking about the separation of powers.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about constitutions and stuff, we've gotten very sophisticated about, separating the legislature from the executive, from the judiciary. With emerging technology, there's now a whole bunch of other things that potentially need to go into our constitutions. There's a whole bunch of new rights.
Okay.
What screams out, for instance, is that money is not one of the things that is required to be balanced or is required to be independent, right? It's just, it's not even addressed within our constitutional framework necessarily. It's simply the government spends money into existence, and if we can end up with runaway inflation and therefore crippling interest rates. And
you'd think that would be quite difficult to legislate something into the constitution like that when so much of the government's power comes from manipulating money. Are you saying to separate it completely and have some rules going?
So this is the problem, right? So your fiscal policy and your monetary policy is going to governments who are used to having power over that. But what they're not used to having is granular control over your spending, right? So the problem with this technology, once I automate it, we're used to government only caring about big things because the technology that we used to have only allowed government to do things in a clunky way, right? Like it's when we talk about regulating stuff, very often we forget about small payments. So we used to say $10,000 of cash was not something the government was concerned about reporting, and now that's coming down to 5,000 and 2,000. In the US, they're talking about reporting cash transactions or crypto transactions of more than 600. Right, so it's the automation lets government get an ever more granular control over your life, and the problem is because the government can do it, the government will eventually consider that it should do it. And we saw it recently with vaccines and mask mandates, right? Because everyone's got a phone and we can have an app and we can do this, now we can police you in a way that seems low cost and efficient, whereas you would without smartphones and that tech, they're not putting in place a vaccine passport.
Yeah, they don't have the ability to.
Yeah, but the fact they can means they will, right?
Yeah. Is that $5,000 limits currently implementing in Australia, or are they thinking about doing it?
No, I think they've brought it down in Australia.
Okay.
So
that's something for the listeners. Make sure you keep.
It might even be down to two. It might even be down to two.
Oh, really?
See, the problem they have with crypto is, once I tokenize something and then add liquidity to its market, I've turned it into a form of money, right? So stuff that you couldn't possibly use to do a transaction previously, there's no way that you could use the fact that a JPEG file exists on a particular computer. You couldn't use that as a form of money ever, right? But now, I've got something that's reasonably certain enough that people are willing to consider it property. So I take something digital, I now have got a form of property, I take that form of property and I fractionalise it, and then I add liquidity to it, and now it's as useful as money.
Yeah, it's just like bartering with shells, but now we're in the technological era, we've got JPEGs instead, let's barter with JPEGs.
But our laws aren't set up to treat everything as money. Right, and now you can automate it. So it's no point me saying you can't deal in $10,000 of cash, because if I say to you you can only deal in $5,000, well, you can automate multiple transactions of $4,000 on a blockchain network, right? And even $600, it doesn't matter. I can achieve the same effect just by sending multiple transactions at $400.
So I guess with the problems that having the central bank CBDC imposes, as you just said, it needs to implement. Are you saying that to implement a central bank digital currency, we need to have a form of constitutionalism enshrined for money?
Yeah,
And if not,
money and
then
tech and AI, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? Which is
I guess the leading point is if not, then because I find that quite hard to believe that in the next year we'll get a change to the constitution that will enshrine protections into
it
our
won't
money.
happen, right?
So then do we forego the central bank digital currency until we can get something like that? In which case, you're forgoing those benefits.
So the problem you have with the central bank digital currency is that you would like it to be a digital form of cash, right? So you would like it to be a bearer instrument, and you would like it to be private.
Yeah.
Well, because it's digital, and because I've got AML and KYC, I've got anti-money laundering laws, and I've got know your customer laws, and because I impose on banks incredible cost for them to know who their customers are and to police how their customers spend their money. The state, it's a very fascist way of living at the moment, right? It's a hidden form of fascism. Everything is for the state. The bank exists to police you for the state, right? Your ISP polices your online use for the state. The state can't afford to police you. So it delegates, it deputises that function to other significant institutions that we deal with, banks, PayPal, Google, all these entities are being told to police us because the government can't, right? Can't effectively do it. So when you're talking about your central bank digital currency, you'd like it to be useful but blind and dumb, right? So it's your money, right? But it won't be.
And that goes back to the inherent characteristics of money. Bitcoiners often, as soon as you start, and cryptocurrencies, they go down a rabbit hole. What is money? And there are some characteristics of what money needs to be. Fungible. It needs to be supported by identical
store of value, means of exchange.
Right.
Yep.
And I guess with creating these central bank digital currencies, if you don't consider those fundamental characteristics, then down the line you're making bad money at the end of the day, perhaps.
Yeah, but you're making a very good police state.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
there's a quote I love by the original Rockefeller who had the hand in creating the American Stock Exchange way back when, and he said something like, to control a nation, you must first control her currency.
Sure.
And the fact remains we've now gone digital. I might jump back. We've spoken quite technically for some listeners, so I might jump back to talking about the course that you
Sure.
teach, because a lot of your legal students wouldn't have such a technical understanding about Bitcoin and a technical background. So what are some of the key objectives of the course, and how would they be relevant to the legal industry that students are going into?
Sure. So let's try and make it as simple as possible. My interest in this technology from a legal point of view is this notion that it can help scale trust and remove middlemen. So Bitcoin, out of everything else that it did, Bitcoin proved that you could have sound money without a central bank in the middle. It needed no issuer to control how the money was issued and the rate at which it was emitted and all this sort of stuff. It's automated within its own blockchain. And so if you can do money without a central bank in the middle, what else can I do without a middleman in the middle? What can I do without lawyers in the middle? What can I do without courts in the middle? What can I do without banks in the middle? What can I do without all of this stuff? And if you look around, our society we create wealth by scaling trust. We need, institutions to allow complete strangers to interact with each other in a trustworthy way. So I don't need to know anything about you, you don't need to know anything about me, but we enter into a contract, and given certain rules, the courts will enforce it. And so because we know the courts will enforce it, I can reasonably trust that although you're a complete stranger, you know, this contract is relatively trustworthy, right? So the institution of contract relies upon courts and law as this institution.
Which is necessary for conducting business.
It's not just necessary for conducting business, it's necessary for creating wealth, right? So if we want to trust people outside clan and kin, right, if you want to deal with people who aren't your own blood relations and aren't people you meet every day, well, you need social scaling institutions, you need courts, you need laws, you need religions, you need a whole bunch of things that are what's called intersubjectively real things. They're not real. You can't weigh the law, you can't measure it, it doesn't have a colour, it doesn't have a weight, but it exists, right? All I have to do is, the world is full of keep off the grass signs. There's nothing stopping me from walking on the grass except this, you know, this sign, but we do it. And so we have a shared reality amongst us that these things are real. And because of that shared reality, we behave in certain ways and we are more trustworthy than if we didn't share that reality.
It's interesting taking that perspective, because I think a lot of people would think the law's there to be moral, to right wrongs, whereas you're suggesting that it's actually there as a tool to facilitate wealth and
it scales
and
trust. Money scales trust. See, money is, you don't have to want to spend that money. Without money, I'm having to trade with you. You've got some wheat, I've got some oil. Yeah. You know, you need oil at exactly the time that I want wheat to make it work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But otherwise, we can just do money. I can buy your wheat, and now I've got money, and when I feel like it, I go and buy oil. Yeah. And so that allows for us to scale our transactions. We can do more. What I think we're seeing is that our current social scaling institutions have reached their limit. Our last great social scaling institution was the internet. And what it scaled was information sharing. It is now incredibly easy to access information. But what it didn't scale was trust. We shared information, but the provenance and trustworthiness of that information doesn't travel with the information. You can read all kinds of rubbish online. And the effort of trying to police that internet environment is now breaking our institutions, right? We're down to saying you don't have freedom of speech, right? One of our core principles, because we need to police this disinformation that's going on the internet. We need, this is not a trustworthy environment. We've got to find a way to make trust travel with the information. And so we've got an ever-increasing layer of bureaucrats, of lawyers, of police, of accountants, like this incredible layer is what's trust infrastructure that we need to make it all work. And it's falling apart, right? It's just not. There's too many powerful middlemen. Our banks are now incredibly powerful. Our internet service providers are incredibly powerful. Our social media companies are incredibly powerful. They're the middlemen that are engorged by this need to scale trust. And they're doing it, and they're actually untrustworthy, right? So they're not. We can't police them in any meaningful way. They're too big to fail, so we can't even fail them. That's the impetus for looking at things like blockchain and smart contracts. So Bitcoin grew out of the 2008 economic crash. Yep. We need better money, right? So government's not going to provide us with good money. Can we provide ourselves with good money? It's a really self-empowering form of technology. We're not going to wait for you, Mr. Government, to hold your inquiries, to go through a deadlocked parliament. If you've noticed at the moment, right, parliament's deadlocked. It doesn't matter. There's 5 different points of view, and whoever steps into the middle gets shot from 4 different sides. It's gridlocked. It's not. There's no winning coalition in politics anymore. There's just a whole bunch of blocking coalitions. So we're stuck. Whether it's climate change, whether it's a whole bunch of, hot button issues, we just make no progress because it's too fractured. So people are going, let's do a different way. Can I do eBay without eBay in the middle? Do I need to have this incredibly powerful global corporation so that I can buy and sell goods of low value globally? Maybe not. Can I do Airbnb without Airbnb in the middle? Do I need a globally profitable, powerful company so that people can lease vacant rooms in their home to other people who might want them? Maybe not. Like, it's all those conversations that come out of trying to use this technology to do different things.
I guess those, it's a great theory, and traditional crypto heads have been saying that for years, ever since it's been created. What's the impediment between the theory that everyone's spouting and a decentralized crypto business taking over from eBay or Facebook?
Sure.
In my opinion, it's the user interface, because anyone who tries to get into crypto on the street, it's incredibly difficult to use. Is that all it is, or is there something more?
No, so there's several factors that stop it from working, and that's the focus of my research and the focus of the courses that I teach.
Okay.
So my research is basically, they say we should be able to do eBay without eBay in the middle. Let's try, right? So they say we should be able to do decentralized self KYC identity. Let's see. Let's give it a go. And then I take what I learned from that, and that's what my two courses are about. The first one is mostly about blockchain and the law, and then the second course, you take what you've learned in the first course and you have a go at speccing up a solution. Go into a particular area where there's legal friction, and residential tenancies. Can you automate residential tenancies in some way, shape or form that's meaningful using blockchain and smart contracts? When you do that, you find exactly what you're saying. The user interface is a problem, because if I've got digital assets, I need a wallet. People aren't used to the idea of digital wallets. They're used to the idea of usernames and passwords and accounts. And so when they lose their private keys to their digital wallet, they expect that there's someone who can reissue, give them, I need a new password for my digital wallet. No. It's as good as you buried your cash in the backyard and you forgot where you buried it. You've lost it, right? That's where we've come from in the world. That's an unsatisfactory answer, and it's a difficult user interface problem to overcome, because you're not interacting with an app in the same seamless way that you feel. You're interacting through a digital wallet. Secondly, you've got latency. The technology is not as smooth, because blockchain transactions, depending on the chain, can cost a lot and can take a long time. So you can't pay for coffee using the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Because it will take up to 40 minutes for the transaction to confirm, and it will cost you potentially more than the coffee in transaction fees to do that. And so people abstract away. They have some other layer that you look like you're paying in Bitcoin, but you're not, right? So all I've done is I've put a hat on a hat, right? I've said you've got a decentralized system, but then I've put a centralized system on top of it. Things like that Celsius, right, which turned out to be a completely centralized. It was just another failed bank, right, that simply didn't have assets to match its liabilities while it minted money, right? That's what you end up with, right? It's a hat on a hat.
For a lot of the solutions you're talking about, say a tenancies database, so like a land title database where you can register property interests, does that surely you still need a centralized body trading with the people, putting it onto the database, but it's just the database itself that's decentralized? Is there a role for centralized bodies as intermediaries? And for example, with the trust, say you send the wrong transaction and you want to talk to a centralized body to give you that money back, is there a role for people kind of as an interface who can between the consumer, that can give the consumer a good experience, and the blockchain which is behind it all?
Sure. There's various ways that you can do that. So most of people who've traded cryptocurrencies will have dealt with cryptocurrency exchanges, which are simply centralised bodies, that they span a blockchain, right? They do the work of allowing you to move from one chain to another.
They won't give you your money back if you send it to the wrong address, though.
No, because they don't control that, right? But they can if it's within their own network. So it's possible to send
if they
currency from one Binance account to another Binance account, right? But that's all within Binance. That's not, you haven't used the blockchain to do that, right? So there's a bunch of, and that's just the old system we've come from. It's a hat on a hat. So you've got this technology that you say is fantastic, and then to solve a problem with that technology, you've got to go and replicate the technology that you've just said you're leaving behind. And that will eventually centralise it, because the third thing that stops you from being able to implement some of this stuff is our existing legal system assumes away the peer-to-peer. It relies on a hub and spoke arrangement. The government loves a throat to choke. And so they
What's a throat to choke?
Well, they love someone to be responsible.
Yeah.
So they don't want to police your interactions online. Yeah. They want the ISP provider to police all its clients' interactions online. They don't want to police how you spend your money. They want your bank to police how you spend your money. Yeah. The bank is the throat to choke. So you'll find at key points of our economy, people are licensed in order to do stuff, and the government uses that license requirement to enforce them to police its laws on you. So your accountant is now a tax agent. Right? As a licensed tax agent, he's got obligations to the tax office. So the tax office is using your accountant to police how you do your taxes. Right? It's throughout our economy. And when you come to do a decentralised system, you will very often come across the problem that you can't comply with existing laws because they assume a throat to choke. There is somebody that needs to obtain a licence. There's somebody that needs to register. There's somebody that needs to do something for the whole system to be compliant. And so now I've got a point of centralisation.
So with the course, the blockchain and legal innovation, so I take it it's a lot about what you just spoke about the theories and the fundamentals and the understanding, and relating it to the traditional world. I know overseas there, for example, in Singapore, a lot of the big legal firms are starting new departments where they consult to blockchain companies or crypto companies. We don't seem to have had that uptake yet in Australia. Is there a different type of what are the relevant laws that departments like that look at? Are they very traditional laws, or?
No, so blockchain is exactly. I mean, I started practicing law in 1992, and back then sports law was the sexy thing, right? It was back just at the point where sport was becoming professional enough, that there was money enough, that there was issue enough, that suddenly there was red meat for the lawyers to feed on. And suddenly everyone had a sports law practice.
Okay.
And it sounded wonderful and sexy, but what you discovered very quickly was that sports law was just every other type of law, but with a sporting person as a client. Okay. Right? So there was unfair dismissal, but for players, right? There was intellectual property, but for sporting organisations. There was corporate governance, but for sporting organisations. There was bankruptcy, but for sporting organisations. Yeah. Like, it was just... So you weren't a sports lawyer, right? You were just... It quickly became apparent that, well, this is just another bankruptcy. Sounds sexy, right? This is just another unfair dismissal. Okay. Blockchain's exactly the same as that. So there's no one body of law for blockchain. If you want to be a lawyer in this space, then you need an incredible breadth of understanding and knowledge, because you've got... Firstly, you've got the problem of these tokens as being a form of money. So now I have to care about money and banking laws. and things like Payment Processing Act, and whether your token is a holder of stored value, and is your stable coin, are you a holder of stored value, or are you, are you something else? I've got tokens that represent or arguably represent a form of investment, so now I've got to care about the managed investment scheme requirements and the prospectus requirements of the Corporations Act. When I get into NFTs, I have to care about the fact that my NFT might be a form of money, and I have to care about the fact that my NFT might be a form of investment, and I've got to care about copyright laws.
Copyright,
Right, now I've got to work out how to properly structure all of the potential copyright issues that exist with NFTs, and some of those are not easy either.
Yeah. So I guess it is a niche in itself, but it is adopting a lot of the, or refining a lot of, say, the traditional IT laws and the other laws you spoke about. On that, I know we've gone quite over time, so sorry to keep you. But I guess as a final question...
So let me just make this point, because it might be relevant. For the area of law that this law most suits, in my experience, are entertainment lawyers. Anyone who's done films will have been involved in copyright, will have been involved in monetisation of that copyright, will have been involved in business structuring and things like there's a waterfall type arrangement that this money goes to you first and then on to this person. The employment arrangement for all of the actors and the independent contract arrangement for the actors, they're the people who've most had, and raising the money and making sure you're meeting the managed investment scheme rules, etc.
Why specifically entertainment as opposed to, say, traditional startup tech?
Because they've had the full breadth of issues. The traditional startup tech will have some of it, but not all of it.
Okay, interesting. So final question: the Ripple law case. How do you see that developing? Do you feel, I guess you want it to fail? So with the recent comments that the SEC made on Ethereum about the Howey test, meaning they suggested that Ethereum now is relatively centralized, so it probably will be a security. Does that make you worry about XRP being a security at all, seeing as a lot of it's owned by Ripple?
So it's not the ownership that makes the difference, right? And people just have to get that out of their head. Doesn't matter if you own 100% of it. What
about it giving them the power to, say, manipulate the price of Ripple? They can dump a lot of XRP tokens, and that can hurt some people.
De Beers was able to dump the price of diamonds, right? Everyone who if the amount that you own and the extent to which you can influence the market matters, then we've got an awful lot of commodities that are actually securities under US law. So, and it's important to remember, this is a case that's unique to the US. Like, it's weird, right? They have a weird view on what constitutes a security. They have a weird view about what should have had a prospectus and should have been registered.
So you think it would be different in a non-US jurisdiction?
No other jurisdiction has formed the view that these things that these things are like a share and should have a prospectus.
Do you not think that Australia and the UK, with the how lockstep we are with the US...
No, because the UK has already decided that XRP is not a security, and Australia is too. We've got rules that make it exempt from GST on the basis that it's a form of payment. Okay. So it's not that it's a particular issue in the US because their securities laws are incredibly vaguely drafted and then incredibly vaguely interpreted, and secondly, you've got just a politically ruthless head of the SEC who is just simply not a good faith actor. Like, what they're doing over there is not designed to provide clarity. What they're doing over there is designed to try and improve their jurisdiction over this space at the expense of other regulatory agencies like their Commodities Exchange Commission, Commodity and Futures Markets Commission, whatever it is.
So you
CTFC.
Right. Okay. So you think new jurisdictions, and if cases were to be held in Australian courts in the future, will take the UK and Australian approach as opposed to, and if
well, it's not our approach, right? We've got
ruling.
defined terms about what is a managed investment scheme. Like we've got legislation, and the benefit that we have in Australia is that by and large, our lawyers are simply better lawyers than the ones that you like. Our legislation is simply better drafted. We have better technical skills within the entities that draft our legislation compared to the US. Their legislation is woeful. If you want to see how woeful American drafting is, just open up your Apple device and have a look at the license agreement, or have a look at your Microsoft Word agreement, your license agreement to use Microsoft. It's woeful. It's woeful. Australian lawyers don't draft that way. We're technically better.
Yeah. Great. Well, I see a hand being raised. Thanks so much, Scott, for coming in and spending the time. There are a few points there that made me think twice, so really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Great.